Good afternoon and good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's online session. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. This session is being hosted by the University of Nicosia Medical Center, and it is titled High Blood Pressure. Let's learn how that DASH diet can help. So my name is Maria Cecilia Mosquera. I am a public health preventive medicine physician and a pediatrician and a lifestyle medicine and obesity medicine certified physician. I work in the Department of Primary Care and Population Health in the University of Nicosia Medical School. I'm also working with the University of Nicosia Medical Center, who is hosting this session for you tonight. So welcome to all of our unique community and the patients of the medical center. So high blood pressure, let's talk about how the DASH diet can help. So the purpose of this talk is to provide adults with some knowledge and tools on things that can help lower or control their blood pressure, namely the DASH diet. So we're going to talk about the importance of diet for blood pressure and for high blood pressure. We're going to explain what is the DASH eating plan. We're going to talk about some easy ways to incorporate some DASH-friendly foods into your day. And we're going to talk about creating SMART goals. So today's session will be 1 hour. So please feel free to stand up, stretch, move. No need to sit down. I'm going to be sitting down for this session so that you can hear me, but you can please feel free to walk around and stretch as you're listening. So let's talk about high blood pressure first to make sure we're all on the same page. So what is blood pressure? Blood pressure is the pressure of the blood pushing against the walls of your arteries inside your body. And arteries carry your blood from your heart to your brain and to other parts of your body. Your blood pressure normally goes up and goes down in different parts of the day with different types of activities. Your blood pressure might go up, for example. The blood pressure in your arteries, we talk about when you go to the doctor. You get checked for your blood pressure in your arm, for example, and they look at two numbers. The top number that they give you is the systolic blood pressure, and that's the number of the pressure in your arteries when your heart is beating. And diastolic blood pressure, the bottom number that they give you, is when your heart rests between beats. So if we tell you your blood pressure is 120/80, 120 is your systolic blood pressure and 80 is your diastolic blood pressure. And those two numbers together tell us about how the pressure is in the arteries of your heart. So what about high blood pressure? So a normal blood pressure level for most adults is less than 120/80. If you have high blood pressure, that's called hypertension. And the problem with hypertension is that it can cause heart problems, heart disease, heart attack, stroke. So it's not just that your blood pressure is high. What we're worried about is what can happen in the long term. But we know that there's actually a diet or a way of eating that can help with high blood pressure. And that's what we're talking about today. So you may be following us today in the YouTube video, in the YouTube format. There's a chat box. Whenever you see on my slides a little red box in the bottom is when I'm encouraging you to chat with me on the chat box. So for example, maybe some of you have already heard about the DASH diet. Maybe you're already following it. If so, just tell me in the chat box in our YouTube chat feature. So what is DASH? DASH stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. So the DASH diet, the name for the DASH diet actually came from a study that was published in 1997. So that's almost 25 years ago. And it was originally a study of almost 500 adults. And these people were divided into 3 different groups, and each group ate a different diet. The first group ate a regular diet. The second group ate lots of fruits and vegetables. And the third group ate lots of fruits and vegetables, but they also ate low-fat dairy products and foods that were lower in saturated and total fat. And that third group was the DASH diet group. What they saw when they did this study was that the DASH diet showed a significant difference. And at just 2 weeks, people started lowering their blood pressure by a few points and more than any of the other types of diets. So the people that were just eating more fruits and vegetables or the people that were eating a regular diet. So we have now more than almost 25 years of evidence, not just with the original study, but many studies that have been done since then of people eating a diet that is called the DASH diet, and with the benefit of it improving or helping them control their blood pressure. And that's why we're talking about you today. So this diet has been around for 25 years. We want you to be able to know about it. And the important thing is this diet can lower blood pressure in people who either have high blood pressure or even if you don't have high blood pressure. So if your blood pressure is normal, it can also lower your blood pressure by a few points. So what else can the DASH diet do? Well, in the long term, it can help protect you against heart disease, stroke, cancer, for example, colorectal cancer, and even type 2 diabetes. So not only is it good for your blood pressure, but good to help protect you against some potential other diseases that you might not want to get. The other thing we want to have you know about is that if you follow a DASH eating plan, and on top of that, you lower how much salt or sodium you eat in your diet, the combination of those two things can lower your blood pressure even more than if you were just doing DASH alone or just lowering your salt. So we want you to know about this so that you have a chance to try it out and see if it can help you. So just to point out, I'm naming it the DASH diet, but it really isn't a diet. It's a plan for eating that helps lower or control blood pressure. So it doesn't require special foods or particular recipes. The purpose of it is to learn how to eat in the longer term, to develop a way of eating that can help you live a longer, healthier life. So DASH is one part of a healthy lifestyle. Remember that there are other things you can also do to help with high blood pressure. One is to do physical activity. The other one is to maintain a healthy weight. The third is to limit alcohol, because alcohol intake has been tied to high blood pressure. And the fourth is to manage and cope with stress. So we won't be going into detail about those today, but remember that those are also a big part of the healthy lifestyle. So what exactly do we eat when we're on the DASH diet? So the aim for food with DASH is for meals to revolve around foods that are naturally high in potassium, calcium, magnesium, fiber, and protein, and low in sodium, sugar, and unhealthy fats. So what does that mean? Well, let's talk about in Cyprus. In Cyprus, we're actually pretty lucky. I'm putting some pictures here of vegetables that are found in meals, in markets, and in places all around Cyprus, depending on the season. We also have fruits all over. Right now, it happens to be citrus season, so I have oranges in the trees growing on the sidewalks, or lemon. So we have tons of fruits and vegetables in Cyprus. So obviously, fruits and vegetables are part of a healthy diet. But they're not the only thing you eat when you're on DASH. This long list of foods here are the ones that you eat when you're on DASH. So you want to eat whole grains, vegetables and fruits, dairy products. The emphasis is on low-fat dairy products, lean meats, poultry, fish or eggs, nuts, seeds, or beans or legumes of any type, and then healthy fats and vegetable oils. So you can eat all types of foods. The recommendations are that you also limit certain types of food. So it doesn't mean you can't ever eat them, but the idea is that you should limit them because those are the ones that have been connected with high blood pressure. For example, foods that are high in saturated fat, like fatty meats, full-fat dairy products, and tropical oils like palm oil, which is found in hazelnut chocolate spreads, and coconut oil. Sugar-sweetened beverages are also things you should avoid, such as sodas or soft drinks, and sweets or desserts, and then sodium, things that contain sodium, and we'll talk about that later. So you should limit how much of these you eat. So how do we know how much and what actual foods we eat? Well, this particular DASH eating plan tells you how many servings you should be eating from each of these different food groups that are listed on the screen here. Grains, vegetables, fruits, low-fat dairy, proteins, nuts, seeds, and legumes, fats, oils, sweets, and salts. And how many servings you eat depends on how many calories your body needs. So calories are what we use to keep our body going. We get our calories from food. Our body processes them to help us keep on going. But if we eat too many calories, that's when we can gain weight and deposit them in fat and other pieces. So this very complicated image here is just to show you at the top that there is a chart that I'll refer you to on the website that's listed on the bottom of the screen, and I'll put this throughout the presentation, where you can actually go look up for yourself, say you're male or female, and either you're not very active, you're moderately active, or you're vigorously active, how many servings would you want to be eating on the DASH diet of each one of these food groups? And I'll give you an example. This chart here shows men. So on the left-hand side, we see those who are sedentary, which means that they're not very active. Say you don't do much exercise, you work in an office all day long and you don't do exercise. Then you would, and depending on your age, let's say you're 40 years old, you would be eating 2,200 calories a day. If you're 50 plus, you would be eating about 2,000 calories, and you get to eat more if you're more active. You know, if you're a marathon runner, you need to eat more calories than if you're somebody that works in an office and doesn't do any exercise, right? For women is the chart that I'm showing you now. And so I am in this middle group, and I am moderately active. So for me, it's going to be about 2,000 calories or a little bit less every day. And that's what my body needs to keep on going. So the images that I'm going to show you in all the future screens are going to be based on me, to give you me as an example. And that's a 2,000 calorie diet, which is somebody that's like a man and maybe 50 and over and doesn't do much exercise, or somebody who's a woman around my age and is moderately active. So we're going to talk about this today. But what does that mean? I just showed you a whole bunch of complicated charts. And let's talk about this, because otherwise it might be somewhat confusing. And somebody just wrote in the chat box for us to save this session. Absolutely, this session is being recorded. You're going to be able to access this later, which is why I'm putting all this information for you here so that you can watch and record it in the recording afterwards as you want to. So tell me what this means to you, the DASH diet. So I just put an image here of all the different food groups that we try to eat and some that we try to avoid or limit, like sodium. So we're going to go through each one of these in sequence first. So let's talk about grains. So grains are, for example, I have my oats here. So this is a whole grain. You want to focus on things that are not processed, like instead of white rice, you might want to use brown rice. In this image on the screen, it tells you what a serving size would be. So it would be one slice of bread, not a whole basket of pita bread, for example. Or it might be half a cup of cooked rice, which is about this much, about as much as fits into my hand like this, right? So in grains, you get to eat about 6 to 8 servings each day. Remembering that a serving is one slice of bread, so you're not going to be eating a basket of pita at lunch and a basket of pita at dinner, because then you'd be done with your 6 to 8 servings, right? So whole grains is one. Vegetables is another one. And this one you get to have 4 to 5 servings per day. And most people don't quite get there. So the goal for most people is try to increase the amount of vegetables that we eat, right? So if you eat 1 cup of rocket or arugula, this is what 1 cup looks like. You can eat 5 cups of arugula in one day if you want to, but in food and in our diet, the idea is not to focus on just one vegetable or fruit, but to add variety. So the idea would be for you to eat 1 cup of rocket or arugula, maybe half a cup of cooked carrots, and other vegetables mixed throughout the day. So this is for vegetables. Let's talk about fruits. So fruit sizes would be a medium orange or a mandarin. This one is slightly on the larger side. Or it might be 1/4 a cup of dried fruit that's unsweetened, because a lot of times you go to the stores, for example, in Cyprus, and they dry mango or other fruits with sugar. So you have to make sure it's unsweetened. And then half a cup of juice if you feel like unsweetened juices, if you feel like you need to include those in your diet. So fruits, you can have 4 to 5 servings per day if you're around my age and my activity level. Now let's talk about dairy. So in Cyprus, we have a lot of dairy products. Halloumi and feta are part of the diet, and the day as is yogurt. So think about the types of dairy that you're eating, because the recommendation is for the DASH diet, in order for it to be most helpful, your dairy products should be lower in fat. So you wouldn't want to be eating full fat halloumi, full fat yogurt. The preference would be to look for the ones that are low fat. And a serving might be 1 cup of low-fat yogurt or non-fat yogurt, for example. And if you can find a lower fat and maybe even lower salt cheese like anari, you can have 1.5 ounces of cheese. And sometimes people say either your thumb or let's say your finger is 1 ounce of cheese. So if you do 1.5 ounces, that around that might be a serving. Okay, I'm just looking at the chat box because I see that people are putting some comments here. Thank you very much for the comments. Yes, and I know we're talking about weight is very challenging at different ages. So we'll see if some of the tips that we can give you today will answer some of the questions that people or comments people are putting in the chat box of how about it can be difficult to maintain your weight. So maybe some of the things we talk about today will help. So for lean meats, fish, poultry, eggs, you can get to have 6 servings or less per day. Now that doesn't mean that you get to eat 6 10-ounce steaks in one day, right? So when we talk about lean meats, we're talking about the ones that don't have much fat. So a lean cut of a animal product, ideally something like a chicken without a skin, or a salmon without a skin, or 1 egg is, for example, 1 serving. So if you choose to eat 6 eggs in one day, that would be all your servings of lean meats, fish, poultry, and eggs for one day. As we mentioned before, the idea is variety. It shouldn't be 6 eggs. It should be maybe 1 egg for breakfast, and then let's say a size of fish around the size of your palm for lunch, for example. So let's talk about fats and oils. In the diet in Cyprus, olive oil is a huge part of what we eat here with our foods. Here are some examples what a serving size would be. So olive oil is a vegetable oil. With this DASH diet for high blood pressure, you will actually want to limit the amount of intake that you have of oils. So it's actually only 1 teaspoon of vegetable oil. And for this food group, you get 2 to 3 servings per day. So if you, like most people, take your bottle and just pour it in the pan, this would not quite fit into the DASH diet. And you remember I told you, limiting your saturated fat can be helpful in lowering your blood pressure. So that's why we're talking about this today. So even though many people don't do this, it might be helpful to remember and find a way to measure what actually is 1 teaspoon of vegetable oil. And as an example listed here is 1 tablespoon of mayonnaise. And 2 of these would be for salad dressing, the correct serving. So olive oil for this particular DASH diet and for high blood pressure, we just want to be mindful of how much of it we're eating, knowing that we're only supposed to eat 2 to 3 servings of this per day. So it would be about 3 teaspoons of olive oil in one day. You would be meeting your recommended servings. So I'm just looking at the comments because I see people have questions about breakfast. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. It can be helpful to make sure that you're eating in different parts of the day. If you're starving at lunchtime, sometimes you might tend to eat more. But you can talk to your doctor or a dietitian about that because they can help you determine the right times of day to eat and how much you should be eating. So if we talk about nuts, seeds, and legumes, legumes are beans. They're full of fiber, protein, and in this particular DASH eating plan, we can eat 4 to 5 servings of this per week. So it would be half a cup of cooked lentils, for example, today, and half a cup tomorrow. So half a cup 4 times a week, you would fill your servings of this food group. But you could also be eating peanut butter, or let's say some cashews. One might want to eat or some pumpkin seeds. This would be part of this food group. But just take note that for seeds, it might be 2 tablespoons. The same thing for something like peanut butter, 2 of these. Okay, sweets and added sugar. So lots of us like to eat sweets. For the DASH diet, for blood pressure, people might only think about salt, but sweets are an important part as well. So for these, you want to only eat 5 servings or less per week. So if you think about maybe you got a whole box of or 15 boxes of chocolate for the holidays, you might have a lot of sweets sitting around your house right now if you haven't finished them already in the new year, right? So think about what it shows on the screen here is a serving is 1 tablespoon of sugar or half a cup of sorbet or 1 cup of lemonade. So if you have chocolates like these lying around and you eat, 5 of these, let's say, you might be filling up your servings for the whole entire week. So you might want to make some choices about which foods you're choosing to make sure that you can spread what you want to eat through the entire week. Remembering that we're not trying to say you can't have these foods, but if you are thinking about making your blood pressure numbers lower, this is one thing that you can do is thinking about managing your sweets and thinking about how you spread them throughout the week, for example. So these are all the food groups we just mentioned. We'll save sodium for a little bit later. So I went through those examples and we're going to go through those different food groups again. But this time, let's talk about what we actually eat in Cyprus, since we're in Cyprus right now. And I'm just looking at the chat box right here. Yes, so somebody's pointing out that the DASH diet can be very challenging, for example, even for me to explain in this 1 hour that we have together. So my hope today is to give you an overview about the DASH diet. And I'll actually talk soon about what it means about how we eat in Cyprus, because it's very similar to what the traditional Mediterranean diet incorporated. It just has some slight changes. So this is meant as an introductory conversation, but there are many people that are very knowledgeable that are going to be able to help you even more. So I'm doing this talk for the UNIC Medical Center, and there are physicians there that can continue the conversation with you, as well as there's a registered dietitian who can help you continue that conversation, and any other dietitian can help you with understanding this. I'll also have some resources at the end, including a webpage where you can look up information for yourself. So this is meant to be an introduction to DASH diet, and let's talk about what the DASH diet means to us in Cyprus. So here are some pictures of, on the left-hand side, for example, what a breakfast might look like. On the right-hand side, if you go to a restaurant, maybe one of the Greek restaurants, not necessarily Cypriot restaurants. So these are the types of foods that we might have available here if we go out to eat, or if we're in cooking in our home. But as I mentioned, in Cyprus, we're part of the Mediterranean, and people traditionally ate the Mediterranean diet, even though in modern days, many of us have moved away from what a traditional Mediterranean diet involved. So on the right-hand side, you'll see the traditional Mediterranean diet also included whole grains, fruits and vegetables, as I mentioned, olive oil, legumes like pulses, lentils, beans are part of the week and the day, as well as seeds like sesame seed, fish and seafood, and then chicken, some eggs, and then some dairy products like yogurt and cheeses. And meats were really a very small part of the diet, only on rare occasions, as well as sweets, but wine was also included. When you compare that to the DASH diet, many of the groups are similar, but they give you specific servings. Some of the main differences are that alcohol is not recommended for blood pressure control, because there's been a link between drinking alcohol and blood pressure. And other pieces of it are, you'll look to see the number of servings are specified in the DASH diet, whereas in the Mediterranean diet, it's more about the general amounts of servings that you should be considering, as well as how much meats were included might be actually more in the DASH diet, depending upon what you're looking at. So the details of this you can discuss with your local dietitian. Today, we're going to give an introduction and a general concept so that you know about this diet and you have the opportunity to explore it more to see if it might help you. So let's talk about grains. In Cyprus, we have lots of pita bread, lots of delicious breads. Some of them are whole grain, some of them are not. So remember, you want to choose whole grain when you have the possibility. If you go to the supermarket and you can choose between a white pita bread and a whole grain pita bread, it's better to try the whole grain pita bread. But also remember portions. So one slice of bread is you get 6 to 8 servings, and one slice of bread would be one of them. So if they serve you a whole basket, or you have a whole basket of pita bread, you might not want to eat that, because that would be your whole serving for the entire day. Vegetables we have everywhere. You know, most people eat salads traditionally even before the meal has started. So just remember that you can add variety and include it. It doesn't just have to be the salad that you might traditionally eat. There are many other wonderful vegetables we have here, sometimes stuffed with, and they can be with whole grains. You can do with whole grain rice instead of traditional rice, or grilled vegetables. There are many seasonal vegetables, like pumpkin season is a wonderful season here. For fruits, there always seem to be fruits hanging in the trees on the sidewalks of Cyprus. It's one of my favorite things. So I put a picture here of pomegranates. It's not quite the season yet, but right now you see oranges and lemons hanging everywhere. So take advantage of the fruits that we have here, and remember that your portion. So 1 medium mandarin or clementine, 1/4 cup of dried fruit. People eat lots of dried fruits and nuts here. Just make sure that they're unsweetened and don't have salt. And then for dairy products, we have lovely cheeses in Cyprus. Just remember that to make a cheese, usually you have to use salt to preserve it. And many of them are higher in fats. So you want to be conscious when you're choosing cheese of the portions that you're eating, and that sometimes you have the option to choose a lower fat, lower sodium cheese, like anari, for example. So just be mindful when you're thinking about your blood pressure that if you choose something that's low fat and lower sodium, it's more likely to fit within the DASH diet concept. For lean meats and proteins, remember something like a salmon or a chicken, and you take off the skin, the size of the palm of your hand would be the serving, or 1 egg, and you get to have 6 of those per day. For fats and oils, remember we eat salads and we might pour our olive oil on top of it, but remember that 1 teaspoon of olive oil was 1 serving, and you get to have about 2 to 3 of these in 1 day, and then you fill your whole capacity. You know, that wouldn't mean that you wouldn't be able to have breakfast with butter or margarine, and then at dinner time you wouldn't have any more. So you want to think about that when you're trying to figure out how to control your blood pressure, is how to spread these things throughout the day. And then nuts, seeds, legumes, and sweets and added sugar are recommended in per week serving. So the concept is that you shouldn't be eating your desserts like your chocolate, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That these should be sort of special things that you have desserts, let's say, you know, on weekends and maybe once or twice during the week in small portions. These are meant to be, like I tell kids, these are sometimes foods, not everyday foods, right? So, and for nuts, seeds, and legumes, remember that legumes are good for you. They have protein, they have lots of fiber, and you can spread those throughout the week. And you might want to think about, in Cyprus, sometimes we have, you know, wonderful peas or beans as part of the meal. And that was what part of the traditional Mediterranean diet included. So let's take advantage of that. So I've just told you so many things about the diet, all right? So with so many things to choose to be able to incorporate in the DASH diet, doesn't mean that tomorrow you have to change your entire way of eating, right? There are things you can do to get started, right? That might make it easier for you. So let's talk about the different groups of foods and go through some tips. So first, there are ways that you can think about the snacks you're eating throughout the day. Let's say that you're eating a bar that's packaged that is likely to be high in sodium. I actually have one that's near me right now that if you ate 1 bar, that would be about 1/5 of the amount of sodium that you might want to eat in 1 entire day. So instead of that, you might want to choose some of the lovely vegetables we have here. You know, you can go to the market and get them fresh or get them delivered now during lockdown. And you might want to have that with hummus or tahini in a small portion. Or you might want to have some nuts that are unsalted with an apple, like peanut butter and apple. So think about using your whole grains if you're going to have a snack, your fruits and vegetables, and focus on those throughout the day. One of your goals might be, you know, might want to have 1 healthy snack of fruits and vegetables during the daytime, because currently I'm only having, you know, carbohydrates or packaged foods as my snacks. Another thing to think about is the proteins that you're eating. So if you're eating mostly red meats, you could think about one of the goals for you might be to decrease that. And one way you could do that is choosing sometimes to eat lean meats, either removing the skin in some or all of your meals, selecting proteins that are lower in saturated fat. So basically they don't have fat around them. So fish and chicken are usually leaner than red meats, for example. And in the Mediterranean diet and in the DASH diet, people eat seafood. And for the DASH diet, we recommend it to be 1 or 2 times a week fish, and to eat vegetarian like lentils or pulses 2 or more times a week. So think about throughout the week, not a way of increasing variety in the amount of nutrients that you're getting that could help with blood pressure, as is listed on the screen here, is to think about sometimes eating fish, sometimes eating legumes, sometimes eating chicken, and spreading out throughout the week instead of eating red meat every day, for example. Another thing to think about is making healthy substitutions. So I mentioned before, if you traditionally are stuffing your tomatoes or your peppers with rice, you could think about changing that to brown rice. And in sometimes people need a little time to get used to the taste of brown rice. And one of the things you can do is when you're cooking, let's say you usually cook white rice and you usually cook 1 cup of white rice. So you might want to start with 1/4 cup of brown rice, put that in here and fill the rest with white rice, right? So that you can start getting used to the taste of brown rice. And you can increase the amount of brown rice, decrease the amount of white rice as you're cooking over the next days or week until you get used to it. So with the goal of eating whole grains because they have more fiber, more nutrients, and actually have, those are things that can help benefit your blood pressure. So we talked about full fat dairy. So we talked about if you want to choose a halloumi that might be higher in fat and it's preserved with cheese, you might want to think of an anari that is lower in fat and has less salt. Also, if you have condiments and sauces, if you're buying a pre-packaged jar of condiments at the supermarket, those tend to be preserved with salt. So they tend to be higher in sodium. And things like breads and cereals also have salt. We'll talk about that later. Canned vegetables as well. So when you buy these products, you want to look and see if on the outside of the label it says low or no sodium. Because as an example, this can that I have right here has 350 grams, and there are 4 servings in here. So one of these could be almost half to a third or a fourth of your total amount of sodium if you eat this in one day. And then fruit, you want to make sure if you have an option, juice, for example, that is unsweetened, or a fruit that is canned with its own fruit juice as opposed to a syrup. So they're usually something that you can choose when you're buying products to try to choose one that's healthier for you and maybe more friendly to the DASH diet. So if you have some suggestions, I'm looking at my chat box here, and I'll look and see if you guys say some. I will share them here. Just tell us if you have some healthy snacks or substitutions that you have found are very helpful for you that you might want to recommend to others. So I'll let you write that in the chat box, and I'll read it as I say it. And now we're going to go through a couple of slides to show you what a meal might look like if you're trying to focus on a DASH diet with foods that we might traditionally eat here in Cyprus. So on the left-hand side, you might see a plate if you're going out on a weekend, or maybe you're going on a special place, or maybe even in your house, where it includes some vegetables like tomato and maybe some mushrooms, some eggs, some cheese, and some bread. But you'll see that on the right-hand side, it's actually that same plate on the top image, but it includes, instead of the processed breads that are full in sodium and full in fat, you might, for example, choose a whole wheat pita bread, a small piece, and focus on filling your plate with veggies like the mushrooms and the tomatoes and maybe some cucumbers. And then if you have a choice, you might want to have a boiled egg instead of a fried egg to limit your amount of saturated fat. And then if you have the choice of cheese, you might want to choose a lower fat, low sodium cheese like an anari instead of a halloumi. Or if you're choosing a halloumi, if it's possible to make sure that it's well rinsed so it doesn't have so much sodium, but also to make sure that you limit your portions to around a 1.5 ounce per meal, instead of filling your plate with, a whole block of halloumi, for example. So these are ways that you can take foods that we traditionally eat here and just be conscious of how you balance your plate to fill it mostly with fruits and vegetables, low sodium, low fat, but still filled with a variety of foods. And these 3 plates are straight from here in Cyprus. So we have a lovely, it's part of the tradition to serve things like cucumbers and tomatoes for breakfast, which is wonderful. So take advantage of that. Let's talk about lunch. So many times if you go out or you order food, they tend to serve you French fries with the foods here in Cyprus, right? So if you get a plate like the one on the left, where maybe you started with a salad, you were served some pita with some tahini and some tomatoes and maybe even some olives, and then you get this big plate of French fries with some grilled chicken. So what you could think about is taking that grilled chicken and eating the salad, and just before you order it, say, just please don't give me the French fries. And you can eat a little bit of the pita instead of the whole basket, a little bit of the tahini, and focus on, let's say, the tomatoes and ordering some grilled vegetables. So these are foods that are already being served to you. And just by saying no thank you to the French fries and watching your portions, you can still eat the same foods, or let's say eat 1 French fry instead of the whole serving, right? But sometimes it's better to tell them not to even give it to you, because you might be tempted if it's on your plate. So these are, traditional things that you're eating when you're going out or on the weekend or on a Saturday. Just be conscious of how you can lower the saturated fat, lower the salt in your diet. These grilled vegetables, I actually had, they were made for me with spices and no salt added at all, and they were delicious and grilled. Now for dinner, these are 2 traditional plates here in Cyprus. I'll point out that the left-hand side has French fries, like I mentioned, along with bulguri and a red meat. So a more DASH-friendly option would be a stuffed vegetable. You just have to make sure that it's not fully filled with olive oil, but maybe just a little bit. And ideally, it would be filled with spices and a whole grain rice. And let's say your stuffed zucchini flowers weren't fully fried, but let's say steamed mostly, right? So these are foods that we traditionally eat here. You just have to think about ways that you can modify them a little bit so that they make them more DASH friendly. So all these foods you could eat, it's just think about the balance of what you should want to be eating most are those healthy foods we talked about, and limiting the ones that are less healthy, like those that have saturated fat, sodium, and are full fat dairy. So let's talk about some ways you can make your food more DASH friendly. And I'll see if you have any thoughts of things that you're eating now that you're contemplating how you can make them more DASH friendly. Just write it in the chat box and I'll keep on looking. So we're going to go through sodium. We've talked two times now about all the different food groups that are allowed in the DASH diet. But specifically, we're going to talk about sodium because I mentioned before how it's been studied and shown that if you focus on eating these DASH food groups in the ways I spoke to, and on top of that, you think about your sodium, doing those two things together can actually help your blood pressure even more to be lower and controlled. So how do we cut down on our salt or our sodium? So let's talk about sodium. So sodium is in our food. It's used usually to preserve things. We'll talk about that the goal for an average adult is to limit daily sodium levels for a person that doesn't have specific medical issues that their doctor has told them otherwise to 2,300 milligrams or less per day. Now, this is when we talk about the DASH diet, this is the normal level of sodium that we're talking about, that you should be eating 2,300 milligrams or less per day. Sometimes you might actually want to choose to go even lower. That's 1,500 milligrams or less per day. And to keep that in mind, so 1 teaspoon of salt, like the table salt that you would cook with, or you might see on a table when you go to a restaurant, is 2,300 milligrams of sodium. So 1 teaspoon is the most that you should be eating throughout your day. Now, you may be saying, but I don't add a whole teaspoon's worth of salt to my food. Maybe you don't even add any salt to your food when you're cooking. Well, when we look at things that are packaged, like the crisps that are on the right-hand side, I'll give you this example. So this happens to be a 90-gram bag of crisps. And for the amount that is inside that bag, there are 1.26 grams of sodium, which is 1,260 milligrams of sodium. So if you had chosen as your goal that 1,500 milligrams or less per day, if you ate that one bag of chips, you've almost reached the entire amount of sodium you should have eaten in one day. And sometimes you might think that crisps, or potato chips as I would call them, you might understand that those are salty, right? But sometimes we don't think about other foods that are packaged or prepared outside of our home that might also be salty. Because in reality, most of the sodium or salt that we get in our food is not from the salt that you add when you're cooking at home. It's from packaged or prepared foods. So let's talk about, for example, grains. If you eat a box of cereal, packaged cereals, some of those have in a half a cup serving 360 milligrams, which is, when I talk about the goal of 1,500 milligrams per day, that's reaching, to a fourth of your goal in one day by eating just a half a cup serving for breakfast. And most people, if you eat for breakfast, you don't eat a half a cup. You might pour a cup's worth, because usually when you take that cereal, you don't measure it out. You just pour and pour and pour until your bowl is filled, right? So you might not realize it, and you're eating half the amount of sodium that you should be eating in just your breakfast alone. Now let's talk about vegetables. You wouldn't think that vegetables have salt added to them, but when they're preserved like in a pasta sauce, that can have even up to close to 500 milligrams of sodium in just a half a cup of pasta sauce. And so that would be, if you're choosing 1,500 as your goal for sodium, a third of your serving of sodium per day just with your pasta sauce. Those are things that are canned and preserved with salt or sodium. So let's talk about the other products that are listed here. So natural cheeses in Cyprus, we love our halloumi, our feta, all of our cheeses. Some of them for just a 1.5 ounce serving, which might be around this size, could have up to 1/3 of the salt or sodium that you should be eating in a day if you're choosing the 1,500 milligram sodium goal. So think about that halloumi. I'm going to show some pictures here. Let's say you served in your plate 4 slices of halloumi because you thought, oh, they look small, you know, then you might be approaching 1/3 of your salt just with your breakfast that day. Your bread might have had some salt too. Maybe your eggs had some salt as well. And then, you know, you might have reached half of your salt or sodium with your breakfast alone. So these are things that sometimes we don't realize. Preserved meats are preserved with salt or sodium usually. So if you buy a packaged ham, like as on the left-hand picture, or a packaged turkey, those can have up to 950, 800 milligrams per day, which when I talked about the 1,500 milligram goal of salt per day, that is more than half of your salt in just, you know, some slices of ham or turkey in the morning, right? So those are things we don't think about. And poultry, sometimes chicken in the supermarkets, if it's not natural, but it's they inject a salted sort of brine type product to make it look plumper and fresher. So you would think you're buying fresh chicken, it's not preserved, and it doesn't have any sodium. You have to be careful because sometimes it does, and it can be pretty high in that too. So packaged prepared foods that are not prepared at home, even sometimes your lean proteins can be prepared with salt. So salt can be hidden in food sometimes. So that's why some people say, you know, I don't actually eat a lot of salty food. I don't put salt on my food when I cook for it. Well, you have to watch out for the things that have hidden salts like poultry, chicken, cheeses like halloumi and feta, and breads, because breads are cooked with salts. So if you look on the packaging, you'll be able to notice that. So there is a name for something called the salty 6. So these are common foods that can be loaded with salt or sodium. So one is breads and rolls, which most people don't think about that. If you think about salt, you think about like things like potato crisps or chips. You don't think about breads or rolls. So breads or rolls can be loaded with sodium. Cold cuts and cured meats, like the ones that are in the picture. Pizza. Remember, pizza has a dough and a pasta sauce and pepperoni, all 3 of those things plus cheese, 4 things that have salt to preserve them. So those can be very high in sodium. Poultry, for the reason that I mentioned before. Soups that are canned because they're canned with sodium to preserve them. And sandwiches because they tend to have things such as cheeses and cured hams, as well as maybe some pickles that were cured with salt, and some condiments like tomato ketchup, also preserved with salt. So these foods are the ones that are called the salty 6. And I'm looking at my chat box here to see if I see any more comments. I don't see any right at this moment. But if you have any thoughts on what you do to lower the salt in your diet, write those in the chat box now. So I'm going to give you some tips of here in case you don't give us some of your own. So one is, think about your fresh veggies. If you include those in your diet and you include them from home, you chop them up. You can get those very easily at the market or even get them delivered if you're at home and during a lockdown. That can be one way that you can fill up your meal with healthy things that aren't salted, because you can add herbs, for example, to flavor your meal and not salt. Remember that fresh is best. So if you take a fresh fish versus a canned tuna, the fresh fish is going to be better for you because obviously it doesn't have as much salt, because the tuna is going to be preserved in salt usually, unless you see a no salt added tuna, for example. And as I mentioned, you can use herbs and spices to add flavor instead of salt at home. And you can choose to go low or no salt. Remember the example that I gave before of my can of beans, where this one can would be about, you know, 1/4 to 1/2 of the amount of salt that I want to eat in one day. If I'm doing, you know, depends on the amount of sodium I'm limiting in my diet. And this one happened to be regular salt, not a low or no salt preserved bean. So one option is, many people in Cyprus cook the beans themselves instead of buying the canned beans, right? Or if you choose to buy canned beans because that's all that you can prepare at home, or you need something quick, just try to look for the ones that say no added sugar or salt. And remember to pay attention to things that are prepared, anything that's cured or brined, like a ham or a turkey or a sausage that's been prepared with salts, things like condiments like ketchup and mustard. Those are things that are all going to be high in sodium. And you want to take away things. For example, if you have something that you can rinse, like a halloumi, where you can rinse and take away some of the salt that was preserved with, that's a good thing. And don't add extra salt to your own diet by, using your salt shaker. You can use herbs and spices instead, or use a tiny bit of salt in your added salt in your diet if you need it. And then limit salty processed foods, the ones that we usually think about when we think about salty foods, like packaged crisps or chips. So what if you eat out or go to a restaurant? It's easy when you can prepare it at home and you can control what you eat, right? That makes it a lot easier. Well, if you go to a restaurant, first thing, look at the salt shaker and move it to the other side of the table, or put it on the table next to you, right? You don't want it to tempt you, because the temptation might be, some people, like some people I know, tend to just look at their plate that's served in front of them and automatically add salt. They haven't even tasted it and they assume it's not going to be salty enough for them, right? So just move it away. Another thing you can think about trying is look at the menu before you go out, because if you already know what you think you want to order, you won't be tempted by other things that look like they're calling your name, right? But might be things that if you had a moment, you wouldn't have chosen initially. You can make special requests. I do this at home all the time. My husband laughs at me because I always say, can you make me a sandwich with no cheese and no ketchup, or you put the pickles on the side, modify whatever it is you want to make it what you need it to be. And then usually put the condiments on the side. So if you have a salad, tell them not to put the dressing on top of it. Put it on the side. You can take your fork and dip your fork in the dressing, and then grab your lettuce with that, and you can have some flavor of the dressing instead of pouring the whole thing on it. You'll eat less of it. And try for healthy appetizers first. In Cyprus, we have a very good habit about eating the salad before the meal. So start with your salad. Just focus on one that looks like in the picture, where it's greens and peppers and tomatoes and maybe some onions, as opposed to just the big chunk of halloumi that's usually sitting on top, right? So I have given you so much information that you may be saying, I have no idea where to start. This seems like a lot of change. How do I even approach to do this? I don't know what to do, right? So let's talk about that and see what you can do. So think about one thing that's called your attention. Maybe the halloumi thing was really interesting for you. You didn't realize that if you eat 4 slices of halloumi, you might be like eating, half of your sodium for the day, depending upon, the size of your halloumi, etc. So let's say you want to make a goal around that. So what changes are you thinking of making in your life? And I'll look at the chat box to see if anybody has written that to say. What has called your attention about the things that could help with your blood pressure? So if you were thinking about helping your blood pressure, maybe you don't have it and you want to prevent yourself from developing blood pressure, what might you want to change or try? So some goals people might say is, I'll eat less packaged food. I'll eat more vegetables. I'll drink less processed drinks, or eat less cured meats, for example. So instead of saying a goal like that, it can actually be more helpful and be to set something that's called the SMART goals. SMART goals help make it more likely that you can actually meet your goals. So SMART is an acronym. That means that the S stands for specific, the M for measurable, the A for achievable, the R for realistic, and the T for time-based. So that means that you want your goal to have so much detail that it's going to be likely for you to be able to achieve it, because you know exactly what you're going to try, when you're going to start it, and how long you're going to do it. And you're going to make it be over a time frame that you think you can actually try it. So let's give you an example. Let's say healthy snacks was a goal that I was trying to figure out how to fit into my work life. So I decided today is Thursday. On Monday, I think I'm gonna prepare over the weekend some chopped vegetables with hummus, and I'm gonna prepare some dried unsalted nuts, and maybe some food that I'm gonna cut up and package myself. And I'm gonna take with me every day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 2 healthy snacks with me to work so that I'm not tempted to buy things that are in the vending machines or in the local kiosk, peritero, for example. So on Monday, I'm going to carry with me 2 healthy snacks to work each workday for the next 1 week. This is a smart goal because you're saying when you're going to start it, how long you're going to do it. And it's only going to be for 1 week, which is realistic. You're not going to say, I'm going to try this for 6 months, you know, because then that might make it a lot harder to achieve. And you're going to be specific. You're saying 2 healthy snacks. Even more specific would be 2 healthy fruit and vegetable snacks, for example. So think about a SMART goal for yourself. So instead of saying, I'm going to eat healthier snacks, add details to your goal. And it actually is helpful if you write it down. So if you write it down and put it on your refrigerator, and then when the week is over after you tried this snack goal, for example, you review and you say, what happened? Was I able to meet my goal or not? And what were some of the things that obstacles or barriers that maybe didn't let me meet it? So it's not about whether you failed or won. We're not calling it a failure if you weren't able to meet your goal. What we're calling it is an opportunity to let you think about what barriers did you encounter and how might you overcome them. So think about SMART goals. And I see a question that somebody's asking about instant coffee, and I'll address that in a moment. Thank you for asking that question. So let's just finish the SMART goal piece first. So SMART goals are, as an example, for vegetables, that starting on Monday, I might add a vegetable to lunch and dinner each day for the next 1 week. For snacks, we already gave that example. For dairy products, let's say the halloumi was the one that was calling the idea was calling your name. So maybe on Monday, you're thinking about limiting the amount of cheese that you eat for breakfast to 1 or 1.5 ounces, like maybe the size of your finger. And you're going to try that just for 1 week and see how that goes. Or maybe for your goal, you might say only 1 day. I'm going to try it for 1 day and see how that goes. And then I'm going to review what happened. You know, was I able to meet my goal? Was I not? And the important part is, what were the barriers if I didn't meet it, and how can I overcome them? So this is an image of what it might look like to add plants to every meal or snack. For breakfast, people in Cyprus traditionally eat eggs with zucchini, like our picture here, for like a dinner time, but you could eat it for breakfast. A lunch might be a protein, like a salmon with 1 ounce of feta cheese, for example, and a salad with greens and vegetables. For dinner, a whole grain pita with a legume like chickpeas, fruits, and vegetables. And for a snack, you might eat a protein like an unsalted peanut butter or some cashews with some apples. So I've given you lots of examples and idea. For next steps, it's actually up to you to think about, what do you think might be something that you might want to try to be able to incorporate ideas from the DASH diet into your life. Maybe you want to go to the website that I'm going to give you later, where it gives you information on the DASH diet, and you want to try the DASH diet concept for 1 day and see how it goes. Maybe you want to try it for 1 week. Or maybe you're a little bit confused about that DASH diet, but you like the idea that that halloumi has a lot of salt in it and that you have to limit your portions. Or you might want to think about incorporating whole grains. So you thought that brown rice was something you want to try into white rice. No matter what the goal, it should be your own goal and something that's realistic and meaningful for you, with the ultimate goal that you came here today because you were interested in hearing about high blood pressure and something that could potentially help with it. So think about some of the things that we talked about today and how you can make it meaningful to you in your life. Knowing now, I hope, that you've realized that there actually is a diet that can help you control and even lower your blood pressure. Sometimes this diet can actually help people lose weight. Sometimes people maintain their weight. So this is a diet specifically meant for weight loss, just in case you were wondering that. And let's look at our summary. So the overall idea is for us to eat more fruits and vegetables, to choose whole grains, to choose low-fat dairy, and choose lean meats, poultry, or fish, with beans, nuts, and vegetable oils that are not tropical, like not coconut oil, not palm oil in our diet. While we're also limiting foods that are high in saturated fat, like fatty meats, fatty red meats. We're limiting our sugary drinks, so we're trying not to drink sodas that are filled with sugar or juices that are filled with sugar. And we're limiting the amount of sweets, so we spread them throughout our week. Remember that we said sweets are sometimes foods, not every day, 3 times a day kind of food, right? And we want to limit the amount of salt in our diet, not just the kind that we add to our own meals, but the kind that we get from packaged, canned, prepared type foods. Because thinking about the DASH eating plan, remember what I said at the beginning. So this DASH eating plan, in just 2 weeks of trying it, can actually lower your blood pressure if you have high blood pressure already, or even if you don't have it yet. So it might be something that is worth a try. And if you need more information, I mentioned before that you might want to talk to your doctor or registered dietitians, like the doc physicians and registered dietitian we have at University of Nicosia Medical Center, or the other ones in your community if you don't come to our medical center. Remember that this is a diet that has research over 20 to 25 years. So the concepts of it might be things that you can think about how to incorporate in your life. And somebody pointed out earlier, the DASH diet concept, sometimes it takes a little time to figure out how to fit in your own life. And that's why we want you to know about it and now come up with your own SMART goals of what points of it you can take to apply to your own life. And that's where starting with small steps is key. You don't want to say, I'm going to try this diet for 6 months. It's easier to say, I'm going to try it for the next week. See how it goes. What barriers did I encounter? How can I overcome them? And your doctors can help you with that process, or your dietitians as well. And remember that it is possible to lower or control your blood pressure. So this diet has helped and worked people, particularly if your blood pressure is, let's say, in the 140 to 160 range. This diet has helped people who are particularly in that range for systolic blood pressure. So there is a diet that can lower or control your blood pressure. And this is the resource. I'm going to leave it on the screen now. This is the page that has the information on how many portions you would want to think about based on your age, your gender, and how active you are. Remember, this talk is being recorded, so you'll be able to access this information later. This is going to be saved, so you don't need to rush to write it down right now, but you can if you want to. So let me just look at the chat box to make sure. There was a question about instant coffee. So instant coffee, so coffee and caffeine are not addressed by the DASH diet specifically for high blood pressure. This is a question specifically you can put it to your own individual doctor or your own dietitian to talk and think about how it fits into your life and your diet. In general, you can look at the packaged product that is the coffee to make sure that there's nothing else added to it. If it's not a plain flavor, for example, it might have some additional things to preserve it. In general, they may not. They may not have, for example, added salt, but just look at your package to make sure that it's just coffee and doesn't have salt or anything else or any other flavorings added to it. So if it is like that, I would assume it's just going to be like regular coffee, which the DASH diet does not specify in particular how much you should have of it per day. So for blood pressure, if you have further questions, I would suggest you reach out to your own individual health doctors and health professionals first. Let me look at the other questions that I have here. Perfect. So somebody wrote on here that has already started the DASH diet. So thank you for sharing that with us. And you already set a goal to eat less packaged food and to reduce salt. So that's wonderful that you're already on the way and you've already in the process of attempting the DASH diet. So remember for your own self that you've already started it. You can continue to set small pieces of goals. You mentioned you want to eat less packaged food. So you might want to say, for this 1 week, I'm going to choose this particular type of packaged food, and this is how I'm going to decrease it in my life, so that you can choose very specific things to address and make it easier for you to meet it. So I congratulate you for already trying it. I wish you the best of success. Let me make sure that there's nobody else that has other questions or points. Somebody mentioned that hypertension can be very tricky because you may not actually have any symptoms until your hypertension is very severe. That's a very great point. And they ask, what medical tests should you take and how often to prevent serious consequences? So you should be seen by your doctor. Part of what they can do is at the University of Nicosia Medical Center, they have a process to follow patients with different types of things like high blood pressure and diabetes. Well, they have a plan of things that they would recommend for you based on what you have. So talk to your doctor. There should be routine things that they should be checking. Obviously, they should be monitoring your blood pressure, but depending on your level, they may have certain recommendations about things like your vision and looking at thinking about how your kidneys are doing, etc. So So talk to your doctors. They will, and your medical care providers, your medical center providers, they will be the ones that will be able to give you recommendations. So because you are right, that's part of the problem with blood pressures. People have it and they say, I feel fine. There's nothing wrong with me, while in these hidden changes that are happening in your body are happening that in the end can end up with you having something like a heart attack or stroke, and you didn't feel it. You didn't feel what was happening while that was occurring on the inside of your body. So that is a great point. Thank you for pointing that out. So we are done with the presentation for today. Oops, sorry for shaking my measuring cup. I just wanted to point out that in the chat box I've written that there is a feedback form. If you're accessing this presentation from the University of Nicosia Medical Center's web page, there is an event page that has a feedback form listed there. I am putting it on the screen, so when this presentation is saved, you have access to it. Unfortunately, the YouTube chat box does not let me share links, so I couldn't send it to you there, but please feel free to give us feedback on this presentation, including what types of presentations you'd like to see next. Was this beneficial? That's what the form asks. You know, we want to know some details, and the feedback form is anonymous, so I would fully welcome your feedback because we want to make sure we continue to make presentations or modify the ones that we're giving to make them meaningful to you. So before you leave today, just remember to think about it for yourself. What's the one thing you're going to take with you after this talk and presentation that maybe you can think about incorporating in your life that would be meaningful to you? If you're willing to share it, please put it in the chat box. If not, just as you go on with the rest of your day, as you prepare for dinner, just think about that one thing that you want to take from what you heard today. And I'm happy to look at the comments and questions that I have in the chat box. For the rest of you that are ready to go and you're finished listening for today, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. I'm glad to have spent this afternoon, early evening in Cyprus with you, and appreciate the time you spent with us here, and wish you the best in your journey for a healthy lifestyle. Remember to reach out to your medical care professionals and your registered dietitians, like I mentioned at the University of Nicosia Medical Center, if you have further questions about the DASH diet or anything about your medical care. So thank you so much, and we hope that you have a wonderful evening.